Night had fallen, heavy, silent, suffocating. Not even the crickets chirped. My street, usually bustling with life, was a ghost town. I sat alone in the living room, a single lamp pushing back the darkness. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I felt watched, uneasy. Something wasn't right. Then I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock at the door. It echoed in the silence, sending another shiver through me. Who could be outside at this hour? The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes you question every creak and rustle. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows that danced with the slightest breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air was thick with tension and my heart pounded in my chest as I peered out the window. Fear coiled in my stomach, a tight knot that seemed to grow with each passing second. I tried to steady my breathing, but the anxiety was overwhelming. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back as I strained to listen for any sign of movement outside. I crept towards the door, dread growing with each step. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each sound echoing in the quiet house. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a burglar? A lost traveler, or something far more sinister? I reached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the peephole. Peeking through the peephole, I saw him. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the porch light, his features obscured by the darkness. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there as if waiting for something or someone. My heart raced faster and I felt a chill run down my spine. A tall, gaunt figure in a long coat and hat, his face obscured by the shadows. He looked like something out of an old noir film, a relic from a bygone era. But there was something off about him, something that made my skin crawl. His presence was unsettling and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, even though I couldn't see his eyes. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to look away from the figure outside. He seemed to sense my fear, and for a moment I thought I saw a glint of something. Was it a smile beneath the brim of his hat? Faint whispers, barely audible, seemed to come from him. They were like a distant echo, words I couldn't quite make out. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to tell me something. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear, but the words remained just out of reach. They were high-pitched, distorted, like nails on a chalkboard. The sound sent shivers down my spine, and I clapped my hands over my ears to block it out. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more frantic. It was as if they were inside my head, a relentless, maddening noise that I couldn't escape. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I was trapped, caught in a nightmare from which there was no waking. The figure outside remained motionless, a dark sentinel in the night. And the whispers, they continued, a haunting chorus that filled the air with dread. I knew I had to do something, but what? The fear was overwhelming, and I felt myself slipping into a state of panic. The night seemed endless, the darkness impenetrable, and the whispers, they would not stop. Hesitantly, I opened the door a crack. A cold draft swept in, carrying with it the stench of decay and damp earth. "Can I help you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The figure leaned closer. A streetlight flickered, illuminating his face for a fleeting moment. Two black eyes stared back, devoid of any warmth or humanity, eyes that seemed to burn into my soul, eyes that would haunt my dreams forever. I slammed the door shut and stumbled back, my heart pounding against my ribs. Peeking through the window, I saw nothing. The stranger was gone. Had it all been my imagination? A trick of the light? I tried to convince myself, but the image of those eyes remained seared into my mind. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the sofa, every creak and groan of the house sending shivers down my spine. The next night, the knocking returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. Panic welled up inside me. I refused to answer, but the knocking continued, relentless, driving me towards madness. Through the window I saw him again, the same shadowy figure, the same chilling presence. He stood motionless, yet I could feel his gaze burning into me. The knocking grew louder, shaking the entire house. Terror gripped me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I backed away from the door, desperate for an escape. Then silence. I held my breath, listening for any sound. Minutes crawled by, each one an eternity. I dared to hope that he was gone. Suddenly the lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. A cold hand clasped over my mouth, stifling my scream. I thrashed against the grip, my blood turning to ice. "Don't be afraid," a voice rasped in my ear, the sound chilling me to the bone. It was him. He was inside. He turned me around, and in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, I saw his face. My blood ran cold. It was a face I knew all too well, yet in this moment, it seemed foreign, almost monstrous. The shadows played tricks on my mind, making me question everything I thought I knew. The room felt colder, the air thicker, as if the very atmosphere was conspiring against me. It wasn't the face I was expecting. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The silence between us was deafening, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. I took a step back, my mind racing to make sense of the situation. This wasn't the face of a monster, but of someone I knew. John? My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world. But why was he here, and why did he look so terrified? His eyes, usually so full of life, were now wide with fear, darting around the room as if expecting something or someone to appear at any moment. I gasped, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" I managed to whisper, my words barely audible. John didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he was afraid of startling me. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick fog of dread that seemed to envelop us both. John, my best friend, looked at me, his eyes filled with a terror I had never seen before. It was a look that sent chills down my spine, a look that spoke of horrors I couldn't even begin to imagine. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he just stood there, trembling, his fear almost tangible. "He's coming for me," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Who was coming? And why was John so afraid, I wanted to ask, but the look in his eyes stopped me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror, a look that told me that whatever was coming, it was something far beyond my worst nightmares. "He wants you to see." John's words were cryptic, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. I felt a knot form in my stomach, a sense of impending doom that I couldn't shake. What did he want me to see, and why was it so important? As I stood there staring into John's terrified eyes, I realized that whatever was coming, it was something that would change everything. The twist in our story was just beginning, and I had a feeling that it was going to be far more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined. Before I could ask what he meant, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the night, echoing through the empty streets and sending chills down my spine. The scream was so piercing, so filled with terror, that it seemed to freeze time itself. I stood there paralyzed, my mind racing with questions and my body unable to move, followed by a sickening thud that reverberated through the air, making my stomach churn. John's eyes widened in horror, his face drained of color as if he had seen a ghost. His expression was a mix of fear and disbelief, and I could see the panic setting in. His gaze fixed on something behind me. I turned, my heart pounding against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. The black-eyed stranger stood in the doorway, his presence menacing and his eyes void of any emotion. It was as if he was a shadow come to life, a dark figure that had stepped out of a nightmare, a sinister smile playing on his lips. He had been behind me all along, watching, waiting, but who was he? His smile was not one of joy, but of malice, a twisted grin that sent shivers down my spine. It was clear that he was no ordinary man, but a harbinger of something far more sinister. And what had he done to John? The answers, I feared, would forever remain shrouded in darkness. The night seemed to close in around us, the air thick with tension and the weight of unspoken horrors. I knew that whatever had happened, it was only the beginning of a much darker journey. The questions swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. What did the stranger want? Why was he here? And most importantly, what fate awaited us in the shadows of the night? The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. It was a silence filled with dread, a silence that promised more terror to come. As I stood there trying to make sense of it all, I realized that some questions might never be answered, and some mysteries were better left unsolved. The night held its secrets close, and I could only hope that we would survive long enough to uncover the truth.